Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the Matrix. As you all know, there was an attempt to assassinate Trump recently. Now, everyone has had their opinions about it, but we're not going to get into it. Oh, who am I kidding? We have to dig into it. I think it's worth a brief analysis. Simply put, Democrats knew Trump was favored to be reelected, and they attempted to assassinate him. Mainstream media is tiptoeing around this theory. Even right-wing media is afraid to just come out and claim it. Everyone knows the Democrats were behind that attempt. But let's listen to MSNBC as they discuss that issue.
Since the assassination attempt of Trump on Saturday, that obviously is going to loom large, not only in this news cycle and in this election, but in American history. As we are now a couple of days out from that, do you feel like the conversation around that is getting more responsible, less responsible? It's moving on in any constructive way?
I think it depends on what audience. Obviously, there's still, a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of doubt, a lot of things that are going on sort of in the ether, sort of around what happened. But I have to say that, I actually experienced that breaking news while I was at a wonderful thing called BlurredCon. It's the black nerds, of which I am one. I like to think of myself as their princess.
Okay, so I find it very sickening that this panel is joking and laughing in regards to a former president almost being murdered. And let's be honest, Joyless Reed went over this beforehand. This was her opening statements in response to the questions regarding the assassination attempt. So it shows how sick Democrats have become that they made sure to inject a moment of callousness. Yes, this is clearly displayed in this discussion, a lack of concern for another human being. But as always, if it were old Joe who was almost assassinated and the right-wing media was laughing and joking in regards to that attempt, all of left-wing media would be enraged. And it's a bit fitting, though, because they can't really show any compassion for Trump, as they spent the last 8 years calling him Hitler. But let's continue.
BlurredCon, we were just chilling, going to one of the food trucks and doing that, and that's when it started to pop into everybody's phones.
Yeah.
And so I had a chance to actually talk to a lot of people in real time and to get sort of people's first instant reaction, and then of course more reactions have been coming in, both I always talk about whether it's the official people or the civilians, and whether it's civilians or officials, and then on top of it, then the news today out of Miami about, what Judge Aileen Cannon did. I will say that the kind of universal kind of reaction that I'm getting, whether it's civilians or, professionals, is really a deep concern and lack of confidence in not us at this table or us at MSNBC, but us as the media writ large. And a fear that what's going to happen now is that the Republican Party will do what they do. They're in the middle of a campaign. The convention started today. But the media will acquiesce to trying to convince people that the things they've been experiencing for the last 5-6 years didn't happen. That the greatest purveyor and promoter of political violence, really, since anyone can remember, since George Wallace, I think, that we just haven't experienced that kind of open, sort of citing or sort of incitement of violence or sort of luxuriating in the idea of violence. It's just not something we're used to anymore in American politics. And then we had to get used to that being a thing. And people are concerned and expressing concern that we won't be the guardians of memory. And that we will allow Donald Trump, as he is, bathed in the glory and grandeur of his party, to rewrite himself as both a hero and a victim, that people who are the most vulnerable to not just the things he's done, but the things he's promising to do, and that will then happen without a guardian saying, wait, stop, and then the media will acquiesce to this rewrite. And the people that I've been talking to don't accept the rewrite. They still remember that this person said, get him out, I'll pay your legal fees. They still remember that Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene did ads where they had long guns and were firing at pictures of Nancy Pelosi and have been promoting the idea that the Democrats, the left, the liberals, it'll be peaceful, said the Heritage Foundation leader, if the left allows it. People haven't forgotten those threats, and they don't want us to forget them either.
So in conclusion, Joyless Reed is basically saying, we don't show any compassion for Trump because of his rhetoric in the past. Let's be fair, his rhetoric was a bit hostile to those who were obviously fiercely opposed to him. But this is a two-way street. Yep, the political mudslinging. We can all hold Trump accountable for rhetoric or other Republicans, but we're not going to forget rhetoric that took center stage in the country neither. Let's look back at all of the so-called metaphorical threats on his life. Wacko Kathy Griffin literally had a severed head of Trump as her way to reject him as her president. This is inciting violence within the communities against a president. It could lead to potential assassination attempts on his life. Or what about Johnny Depp asking a crowd, when's the last time a president was assassinated? Again, this is provoking political violence against Trump. Or what about Snoop Dogg's music video where he is in fact depicting shooting Trump? Or what about Madonna claiming she wanted to blow up the White House because Trump was president? Or what about Robert De Niro claiming he would punch Trump in the face? If you look at the pattern here, these are all celebrities who have a major influence in society, more so than any politician, and they are provoking anger in society against Donald Trump. But then there were politicians who also incited violence against Trump as well. The current president in Old Joe, who stated he would take Trump to the back of the bleachers and beat him up. Has Trump threatened Old Joe with this type of violence? Negative. Sure, he has made fun of him and called him a corrupt politician, but he has never threatened physical harm towards Old Joe. What about Maxine Waters, who encouraged people to harass and confront Trump supporters? As we all know, there have been many Trump supporters assaulted in society, especially in high schools and universities. Does anyone remember the wave of violence against Trump supporters during his first year in office? Many were assaulted, cars and houses vandalized, spit on, egged, and severely injured, simply because they had on MAGA hats. And this political violence was encouraged by politicians such as Maxine Waters. What about Antifa and BLM attacking Trump supporters at protest? And get this, Antifa carries firearms at those protests. Yet all of the political violence on the left gets swept under the rug. The right is also at fault for this political violence. I will say this, though, there have been anti-Biden protests, and there hasn't been any significant violence, apparently. Meaning those who support Old Joe are not going to those protests and challenging Trump supporters. Yet, there's violence at the anti-Trump protest? Seems there is an anomaly, and it's those interlopers known as Antifa, BLM, and even the Proud Boys as agitators. Despite Trump's rhetoric, politics should never get to the point of attempting to assassinate him. But this is the playbook, divide and conquer, to have citizens willing to put themselves in dangerous situations for a political party? Yep, that's the political matrix for you. But here's the thing. All of these spoiled celebrities were friends or associates with Trump before he ran for president, which obviously makes them just political operatives for Democrats. Most of Hollywood are liberals anyway, so when Trump switched to Republican, they went into attack mode. As we've mentioned time and time again, if Trump was a Democrat, he wouldn't have been threatened by those celebrities. He would not be racist. There wouldn't have been those impeachments. And last but not least, there wouldn't have been an assassination attempt on his life. And it shows how desperate Democrats are, because has there been an assassination attempt on Old Joe's life? Has there? Democrats claim that Republicans are gun-toting nutjobs. Surely one of those far-right wackos would have attempted to assassinate Old Joe, right? Hasn't happened. And they claim the shooter was a Republican, but that doesn't mean anything. I think that was a cover to justify it wasn't a hit ordered by the Democrats. Oh yes, let's continue though.
And at the same time, Donald Trump, I mean, for all the using the idea of victimization as a political trope, he is legitimately the victim of this attempt. And I was, looking back at history, looking at previous political violence in our country, and all of the presidential candidates and indeed presidents who have been shot at. And, we've had 4 presidents assassinated. We've had an incredible history of political violence in this country. But one thing that's true over time, when you look back at that whole string, going all the way back to the 1800s, is that the motive of the person committing the violence is never relevant.
Very true.
The act of violence itself ends politics, turns it over into crime, and makes the views and the motivations of the shooter irrelevant.
Wow, these people these aren't people. These aren't human beings. They have sold their souls. When you sell your soul, well, there's nothing left. Your humanity is gone, which leads to this type of dialogue. Every president that was either shot at, or even assassinated, the motive was political, which makes it not only relevant, but the actual motive itself. Madman Maddow claimed that every shooting that happened in political history, the shooter's motive was irrelevant, and Joyless Reed echoes that nonsense. This is suggestive programming to their audience, to suggest this shooter didn't have a relevant motive. So, if there wasn't a relevant motive in attempting to assassinate a former president at his rally, then why the fuck would he, I can't do this. It's out of this world insanity.
I'll take it from here. Let's all just keep our composure. Rachel Maddow suggests that the motive is not relevant. This is what this lunatic stated. Quote, "The act of violence itself ends politics and turns it over to crime and makes the views and the motives of the shooter irrelevant." Unquote. Let's hear that one more time. I can't believe this.
The motive of the person committing the violence is never relevant.
Very true.
The act of violence itself ends politics, turns it over into crime, and makes the views and the motivations of the shooter irrelevant.
Now, what exactly is she saying? Because before I blast her head off, of course, metaphorically speaking, I want to first see if there's some sort of logical point to that statement. Let's hear it one more time to make sure we didn't miss something in there.
The motive of the person committing the violence is never relevant.
Very true.
The act of violence itself ends politics, turns it over into crime, and makes the views and the motivations of the shooter irrelevant.
Well, there's nothing there other than blabbering. We already know it's a crime. Duh, it's a shooting. But why did the person shoot the former president? That is the question. Any attempt at assassinating a political figure is rooted in politics. Why are they trying to avoid this, you ask? It's obvious to why. And the futile attempt to somehow justify the shooting by claiming there isn't a political connection. They should be taken off the air for this. What the hell is this? They're justifying the shooting in a very clever way. But as we always say, you need more WD-40 because you're not slick enough. Let me explain. Claiming that the motives behind the shootings are irrelevant indicates that political motives aren't the main focus, just the shooting itself. Yep, this is what lunatic Maddow is suggesting. It doesn't make sense, and she knows it doesn't make any damn sense. But who is she speaking for? The Secret Service? The Department of Justice? The sitting president and their administration? Oh, let me guess. She knows what priorities those entities are focused on more than a motive. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. Somehow she knows that the motives behind the shooting are irrelevant, which we assume she is getting this information or conclusion from those entities. Because they publicly come out and say, quote, "Our primary concern is the safety and well-being of former President Donald Trump, and we are not concerned about the motives behind the assassination attempt." Oh, okay. Maddow can state there weren't relevant motives, but anyone with half a brain would know there were political motives in all those assassinations, and they were relevant. The problem with that claim is she's actually dismissing the reason behind the assassination, which is quite disturbing when you think about it. In fact, she made sure to not cite any evidence to support her claim, because there was an actual motive documented in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by a man named John Wilkes Booth. You know why Booth murdered Lincoln? Because soon after the Civil War, Lincoln gave a speech that argued black men and veterans should have the right to vote. And Wilkes, who believed in white supremacy, stated that that would be the last speech Lincoln would ever make. And sure enough, Lincoln was assassinated days later. That's a motive smack dab right in your face, and Maddow knows this, since she claimed to research all of the historical presidents who were assassinated. I guess John Wilkes' motive was irrelevant to Maddow, right? But then if she were to suggest that, then what does that say about the historical context of that assassination? Remember, Wilkes assassinated Lincoln due to the proposal of allowing African Americans the right to vote after the Civil War. Now, isn't this one of the primary points you focus on? Racism, oppression, white supremacy, equality, right? Yet you avoid pointing out this political motive of Lincoln's murderer? That's not relevant to the assassination? How disgusting, all to execute damage control for Democrats. Unbelievable. If someone attempted to assassinate Joe Biden, or even Barack Obama, Maddow would immediately point out it was politically motivated, which obviously makes the motive relevant. Yet, I guess when it comes to the political opposition almost being assassinated, who cares about the motive of the shooter? Again, they should all be fired for this. Maddow is being intellectually dishonest, historically dishonest, and politically dishonest. Every assassination of a political figure, especially a president, the motive was relevant. See, it's a deflection that this panel is performing, claiming there wasn't a relevant motive. But if the motive isn't relevant, then why even discuss the attempted assassination then? Just leave the incident alone, since you won't acknowledge a motive. You understand? Put it this way, all of the serial killers in US history would not be infamous, because based on Maddow's perspective, their motives for why they murdered people would be irrelevant to those murders. Yep, it's absolutely bonkers. The public wouldn't know why they murdered those victims, which wouldn't give them the national coverage. It would be just police reports in the newspapers. The reason their motives were revealed is because it helps understand the psychological state they were in, what motivated them to commit such crimes, and also gives the public insight into those serial killers' minds, so they can grasp the dangers that lurk in society. In other words, someone who attempted to assassinate a former president needs to be looked into, because this could potentially happen again. And if you know the motives behind such individuals, you can take better preventive measures. Which was another mystery, by the way. This is surreal at how detached they have become with reality. They can't even admit that it was politically motivated, yet, in the same breath, can point out the political contributing factors from Trump in connection to the attempted assassination? How can you have one without the other? Well, somehow they've done just that. But let's continue.
Everybody in politics, no matter where you are ideologically, must unite around the idea that violence is unacceptable.
Absolutely.
And it's unacceptable both.
Yep, the classic stuttering. She's running into a brick wall. Maddow wanted to say, it's unacceptable both from Democrats and Republicans.
Unite around the idea that violence is unacceptable.
Absolutely.
And it's unacceptable both.
But this would bring back the issue of a motive, which she brushed aside in regards to that violence. The magic pixie dust, yeah, they have a lifetime supply of it. She's mentioning political ideologies in association to both Democrats and Republicans, yet will not admit that the assassination attempt was politically motivated. This panel is stuck because on one hand they're alluding to Trump being responsible for the shooting based on his rhetoric, but can't directly say it because the shooter would have that very political motive that they're afraid to admit on their network. So, what the hell are you saying? You're talking incoherently because you contradict your statements, trying to avoid the obvious. Now I'm getting frustrated. Let's continue.
When it comes to targeted stuff like this, but it's also unacceptable when you try to incite that as a way of getting things that you want that you can't get through political means. So it's true in terms of violent rhetoric, it's true in violence orientation toward the idea of confrontation with your fellow Americans, and of course it's true in the case of some sort of insane event like we saw on Saturday in Pennsylvania. And I just feel like it's a very, I mean, obviously we're all very grateful that President Trump was not more seriously hurt. We are all absolutely shattered by the fact that somebody was killed. Two people were put in the hospital very seriously hurt. But I am hoping that the one positive thing that can come out of this is some sobriety around the idea of violence in politics being no freaking joke and nothing that anybody should play with ever. Yeah. And you're right, you can't be ahistorical about it. And we do need to think of it as a spectrum while being completely real about the risks of this to everybody. Violence, among everything else, is very unpredictable. Once it's part of your political system, you never know which direction it's going to go. Yeah. Nobody can harness it in one direction only. It just doesn't work that way.
Oh, give me a break. This is just outrageous. So is this your admission that the shooter had a political motive? Of course, but why can't you just state this on the fucking show? Because it opens up the can of maggots. Well, it was already opened. But MSNBC could have gained some glimpse of respect and dignity and just admit that this was politically motivated. Be honest. Tell your audience the truth instead of skating around it. They already know, but it's about your integrity as pundits, reporters, and such to represent a sense of transparency and sincerity. Yet once again, it's hard for them to eat the humble pie when they've been contributing to the same political violence they claim Trump incited. Calling a man Hitler time and time again is also a form of political violence, you know. If you're comparing Trump to that person, then you are depicting him as a murderer, dictator who needs to be, get this, assassinated. Now, who's more accountable for the assassination attempt when you put it in that perspective? But let's continue.
Yeah, and if I could just very quick, I don't want to monopolize the time, but the one time I've ever been afraid doing this job honestly, was in 2016 in Cleveland, when men, because it's an open carry state, Ohio, were pacing in front of our position with long guns, with AR-15s, in a way to menace us. As we were in our outdoor positions, they felt that they needed to send a message to us visually with their firearms. And I think about the people who tried to vote in Arizona when men with long guns were standing outside of those polling places to send them a message. You don't vote the right way. I'm here with this gun. And so the idea of political violence that we've been nursing really since then is so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's so dangerous that you cannot avoid the consequences of it, even if you're one of the people promoting it.
No, that's right.
Oh my fucking, this is just astonishing. This cowardly behavior is just unbearable. They don't even have the courage to just say, well, Trump got what he deserved. Just say it already. That's how you feel, right? That's what you're alluding to. Don't be cowards in your spite towards him. Stop with the passive-aggressive rhetoric, attempting to seem genuine, because we all know that's not your makeup. If you can sit in front of the American people and call Trump the modern Hitler, a racist, a fascist, dictator, tyrant, then you should have the same nerve to say he brought that on himself. Oh, that's wrong to say? Oh, that's insensitive? Oh, that's despicable? Now you have a moral pulse all of a sudden? Joyless Reed just stated that you can't avoid the consequences of political violence, even though you're one of the people promoting it. Translation: Trump couldn't avoid the consequences of political violence, even though he was one of the main people promoting it. So basically, he reaped what he sowed. Right, Joyless Reed? Just say it already, don't allude to it, because everyone knows who you're talking about. If she says Trump reaped what he sowed, then the motive is revealed in this discussion. But of course, that motive would be someone wanting to assassinate Trump for that political violence. And let's be honest, the shooter being a registered Republican means nothing. Think about it. Somehow they found out he was a registered Republican before they could find out a motive. And what prompted them to look into a political affiliation? Oh, that's right. Because he tried to fucking assassinate a former president. Yet this panel wants everyone to know that he was a registered Republican, as if this eliminates the possibility that the assassination attempt was ordered by Democrats. It doesn't. In fact, it draws more suspicion just by mentioning his political affiliation. Is there any documented proof that he was a registered Republican? What candidate did he vote for in the last 8 years? Did he vote for Trump? Did he vote for another Republican candidate? They never mentioned his voting history, yet they made sure to point out he was a registered Republican. Even reported that he donated $15 to Act Blue, which is a Democrat organization. All of this detailed information, but no information on his voting history and which political party he voted for. He's a Republican, that's all that matters. Oh, look over there to the right, that's one of your guys who tried to snuff Trump out. Not a Democrat. But, there's some rufflings in the bushes, my friends. There's speculation that the identified shooter has the same name as an older individual who is in fact a Republican, who was the one who donated $15 to Act Blue. Oh, that changes everything, doesn't it? Well, not really, because even if it were the same 20-year-old, the motive still applies. But if it were a different person, and not the registered Republican who donated $15 to Act Blue, then the other individual is still a mystery. We know the motive, that's clear. But who that person is, his background, his political affiliation, and interactions is being kept secret. It's speculation, and we've spotted a few people mentioning this, but we will look into it at another time. Let's get back to these wackos, though. So you allude to Trump getting what he deserved in such a disgusting manner that the pseudo-intellectual progressives and liberals take that inch and create a mile out of it on social media. While you're alluding to it on your network, they're literally stating it on social media, which ravages up the political tension even more in society. They're trying to convince their audience to not show any compassion for Trump by slipping in those talking points that suggest it was Trump's fault that he was almost assassinated. To some degree, there is merit to that. But you have to also focus on your side of that fault. They never address their rhetoric of calling Trump Hitler, which is 1,000 times more inflammatory than his rhetoric. They threw that term around so much, it's like they never truly grasped, or I would even suggest they didn't care about the consequences of what they were saying. Because this creates a perception of reality in the country, that a president could possibly become a tyrannical dictator, taking everyone's freedoms away, and even punishing citizens by death if they don't follow orders. Now, of course, we know this is not reality because the president is not capable of holding that power in the United States, as the Supreme Courts and Congress are the ones who truly control the nation. But those who actually believe Trump holds that tyrannical authority would live in a state of fear and anxiety, which could lead to what happened recently. And never has any left-wing media pundit, political analyst, reporter, journalist, heck, even any Democratic politician and Democratic Congress members came out and publicly apologized for calling Trump Hitler. They can't do it because everything that led up to this point would be in regret. Democrats and the left-wing media are stuck in a peculiar position, and old Joe, his vice president, and the entire administration are also incapable of denouncing that rhetoric, because that's one of their biggest attacks against him, being a racist. What a mess.
And the political system collapses under the threat of violence.
Absolutely.
Because that is the end of politics and the beginning just of the use of force.
I didn't know if we were going to be this real, but as long as we're going there, I'll say this. I've worked on a half a dozen campaigns, and I've never needed any sort of security from the other side. I mean, I worked on Republican campaigns, and I was never under any threat, verbal or physical, from any of the opposing campaigns. Since I've had this job covering the Trump movement, everyone that goes to rallies from every news organization has security.
Mm-hmm.
Most people who are in the public arena rely on security to protect their families. In a post-Paul Pelosi moment, you thought some circuit might trip and break. It didn't. They mocked him. They made fun of him and the circumstances around his attack. In a post-Gabby Giffords America, you thought we might have a real conversation.
In a post-Steve Scalise?
Mm-hmm. And nothing has changed the conversation. It is sick and sad that Trump was targeted. It is an epic tragedy. My parents go to Trump rallies. It is an epic tragedy.
This is the magic pixie dust we talk about. Oh, my parents went to Trump rallies. Nicole Wallace is trying to convince the audience that she has compassion for Trump after being shot. It's these type of Democrats that are the real danger because they have this way of making people think they are harmless. Oh, I'm nonviolent and kind-hearted. But beneath that exterior of being delicate and soft-spoken, they're some of the most disturbed and angry people you would ever encounter. This same person literally flipped out on several occasions, from throwing her little segment scripts to cursing on live television.
Like me, I'm sure that Vidman has the same affinity.
Here we have a U.S. national security official who is advising Ukraine while working inside the White House, apparently against the president's interest, and usually they spoke in English. Isn't that kind of an interesting angle on this story?
I find that astounding, and some people might call that espionage.
Except those people aren't chicken shit like the three of you, and they know that he passed a background check that the president's daughter and son-in-law didn't.
Joining our conversation, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, who would never say that, so he's here to save us, to elevate us. Nick Burns, he advised Bush 41, Bush 43.
I mean, one of the things that has happened in the wake of some of these other violent incidents is that people who have said, I've used rhetoric in the past that now when I reflect on it is not the kind of rhetoric that I'll use again. That's good. That sort of thing ought to be encouraged.
Oh, that's good. What about you? What about left-wing media who has called this man the modern Hitler? How many times has that been uttered by Democrats, left-wing media, the clowns on The View, liberal media personalities on YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, or how about the whole existential threat to democracy? How many times have we heard that line? None of those individuals have come out to denounce any of that rhetoric. They're just not going to use it at this moment in time. But what if Trump was assassinated? Would they feel any sense of accountability for contributing to that political violence that led up to the assassination? Remember, the left created the narrative that Trump was Hitler. They created the narrative that he single-handedly was an existential threat to democracy. And none of it had been proven in the 4 years he was president. Yet they continued to push that narrative. And not only push that narrative, but also impeached him several times and recently attempted to throw him in prison on, get this, trumped-up charges. So all of this done to Trump has proven that, in fact, he is an existential threat to Democrats. And this existential threat to Democrats had become so damaging that an attempt to assassinate him was carried out. So, the Democrats are trying to keep this under the radar, but it's obvious to every American citizen, even those who do not support Trump.
I would just add that why did this happen is a question that can be answered slowly through an investigation. Or for a lot of people, it doesn't matter.
Oh, here comes the culture appropriating Ari, just blabbering nonsense. He claims that it will take some time to investigate why it happened. No, you piece of shit. Everyone knew why it happened before an investigation even started. It's an assassination attempt on a former president, which is politically motivated. Now, who the hell doesn't know this? Oh, I guess this panel is still trying to figure that out, and they're waiting for the investigation to give them updates on why it happened. Oh, okay. For a lot of people, it doesn't matter. Who the hell are you speaking for? Democrats? The American people? You're not speaking for anyone, because a lot of people, as you claim, are questioning why it happened. Are you kidding me? A former president, and likely next president, was almost assassinated. And there's no benefit of the doubt there in suggesting that it's about the violence that occurred, which is the focus of, quote, a lot of people. Bullshit. The violence is a concern, but it's the motives that the majority of Americans are concerned about. And everyone knows it was politically motivated as well. See, they're gaslighting, they're deflecting, and the main tactic this panel is executing, you guessed it, damage control.
And we've referred to people who had it taken an hour or two that was political, which means they're actually outing themselves. And I would think that applies to some people on the right who wanted to immediately politicize this.
People on the right wanted to politicize it? Newsflash, you dipshit. What else could they conclude? People on the right wanted to politicize the attempted assassination. Yeah. No shit, Sherlock. There was a former president who's currently running for president being fucking shot at his rally. If it isn't political, especially with a figure like Trump, then what the hell is it, you fuckface? See, this guy really grinds my gears. I can't stand this piece of shit. And that's saying a lot, considering he's accompanied by Joyless Reed and Madman Maddow. But I see the tactic there, which has been the tactic used by the left since the shooting. Blame Republicans in a subtle manner to keep the heat off of Democrats. Nobody is falling for it, though, which makes them even more confused as to how to keep the heat off of Democrats. Listen, MSNBC, CNN, CBS, they get criticized on their channels all the time. It says a lot when there are tons of comments calling you fake news on your channel. And guess who helped a lot of American citizens realize that? Donald Trump. Yep, when he called CNN fake news, it sent a shockwave through mainstream media. Of course, citizens should have already come to that conclusion, but the president calling them out crippled their support.
And it also has applied to some statements I've seen from people on the left who rushed to look at this as caused by something.
So people on the left rushed to look at it as caused by something? You sound like a moron. Caused by something? Can you share what that something would be, or you're going to keep that a secret? It wasn't a secret or mystery as to how the people on the right felt. The meddler had no problem revealing the right's views on it. Notice the difference in analysis between the people on the right and the people on the left? With the right, he specified that it was political. Yet, with the left, there's this unknown perspective of the attempted assassination.
And it also has applied to some statements I've seen from people on the left who rushed to look at this as caused by something. Caused by something.
In other words, blame the right for trying to make it political, which is what it is. He should be fired, all of them. Let's finish this madness.
But from an investigative perspective, we don't have motive yet. Law enforcement's been on it for several days. We know they got the phone, and they don't feel in a position to tell us publicly that the phone has revealed motive. We have clues that are isolated. So he's a registered Republican, but he's made other types of political donations, and we don't have the full context on that. So I do think it's important to remember that what you said is true. Historically, most lone wolf assassinations do not matter that much as to motive over time.
Yeah.
It would matter if, hypothetically, someone was working in concert with a large organization or a foreign entity, or they were an espionage asset. Then the motive matters a lot because it's an act of war.
Right.
But with what you said, Rachel, lone wolf attacks historically that use political violence, which often relate to mental illness or other sort of kook attitudes, may not ultimately matter.
So let me get this straight. Just because it's alleged to be a lone wolf, their motives don't matter? Okay, let me hear that one more time, because I think my ears may have deceived me. Let's hear that again.
What you said, Rachel, lone wolf attacks historically that use political violence, which often relate to mental illness or other sort of kook attitudes, may not ultimately matter.
If they don't matter, which would be related to politics, then why are you referring to it as political violence? Let me rephrase it so you can see how mentally disturbed these people are. If the lone wolf committed acts of political violence, in which you and your mentally disturbed panel suggest that the motives don't matter, then take the term political out of the scenario and just call it violence. They are so scared of the truth being revealed, though, they can't avoid the phrase political violence. And to suggest the person was mentally disturbed? Yeah, nice try, in attempts to eliminate a political motive. At the same damn time addressing political violence, they're trying to suggest that the shooter was mentally disturbed and decided, I think I'm going to shoot Donald Trump today. Mind you, he planned this out, so he was mentally stable enough to plan the attack, right? So if he's mentally stable to plan the attack against a former president who was and is still leading in the polls for president, and this person decides to assassinate him, isn't this a political motive? A network that is all things politics somehow won't admit that the shooter had a political motive, or suggest that the political motive isn't relevant. MSNBC can acknowledge there is political violence, but won't acknowledge the shooting was politically motivated. Isn't political violence a political motive in itself? Of course it is. And you see how they're stuck in a sticky corner? Attempting to avoid calling it a political motive, yet discussing political violence, which is a political motive. In other words, running from the truth and running into the same truth in the other direction. They're literally all over the place. This is perhaps the most absurd segment on MSNBC I've ever witnessed. And that's saying a lot, my friends.
But that's one question, is why did this happen? Can we figure that out? And then the other vantage point is, why does this happen so much in America? And there's a security failure question for the Secret Service, which has not so far been very forthcoming. And this is a massive failure. Someone tried to shoot a former president in the head.
Someone tried to shoot a former president in the head, yet he claims there isn't a confirmed motive to why that someone tried to shoot a former president in the head, nor is it even relevant. Yeah, well, that sounds logical to me. Who needs a motive, right? Have you guys felt that perhaps you've suffered from like temporary insanity listening to these people? I don't blame you. It will make you go crazy if you're not careful. Here's the deal. It's simple, yet the damage control is where the insanity resides. Donald Trump obtained support from the Black community, the Hispanic and Mexican American communities, which are key groups of support for Democrats. He obtained 8% of the Black vote in 2016, which, if we crunch the numbers, approximately 40 million in population. That's roughly 3 million Black people who voted for Trump in his first presidential bid. And most of that was, in fact, Black men. We all know the majority of Black women who vote are literally nailed down to the Democratic bed. If you look at the 2020 election, there was a mass increase in voter turnout due to the pandemic, so Trump's support from those groups increased even more. This trend will only continue upwards, not decline. Democrats knew this going into the 2016 presidential election, and as we have witnessed up until this point, there has been a conspiracy to keep him out of office, and that's due to losing their grip on those groups. It's simple. Now, there are dire outcomes to this shift in political affiliations and support. Want to know what that would be? The truth behind racism, and this is why Democrats are feverishly trying to keep Trump out of office. Because no matter what they say, no matter how they push the narrative, he's racist, Hitler, an existential threat to democracy. The American people are bypassing all of that. Look at Amber Rose. Sure, she's just another Hollywood celebrity. And we can even suggest she jumped ship from the Democrats to save face. But there was a sense of her accepting that Trump is America's choice for president, and decided to publicly accept that truth. Maybe she thought that the assassination attempt by Democrats was something that encouraged her to disassociate herself from that party. Or we could suggest that she is being used as a distraction by the Democrats to redirect attention away from that assassination attempt. We look at all of the possibilities, of course. But nevertheless, she did have an impact on society and how they viewed Trump, regardless of her true intentions. And guess who came out and tried to discredit her? Joyless Reed. Oh yeah, when they're Republican or conservative, they're sellouts. Ah, yes. But to Amber Rose's credit, she responded to Joyless Reed. But more importantly, she represented a voice of independent thought, the independence to choose and not be compelled to support one particular party due to generational philosophies and past political affiliations of your family, friends, and culture. Stepping out beyond the norm, beyond the belief systems, and deciding to walk the path of independence is something every American citizen, especially the Black community, should embrace. Here at the Chaos Sector, we say don't support any of it until they do right by you. But if you're plugged into that political matrix, then you might want to look to Amber Rose. And I know it's ironic that she's the motivation, but you might want to look to her as encouragement to choose and not be conditioned. After all, these are the rights you have as an American citizen. This is the Chaos Sector.